Hi everyone, let's start. Thank you so much for coming back again today. I see quite a lot of familiar names on the participant list. Glad to see all of you. Today we'll be talking about how to find clients for your freelance business. So last week and I think the week before, we've kind of like set some foundation in terms of how you can set yourself up as a freelancer, and also some of the things that you need to think about as you are designing your service offerings. So today, this is kind of like the third episode where we'll start thinking about how do we get that service offerings, sorry about that, out to your customers, and hopefully we can kind of like give you some tips that is going to be tangible and useful for you. So these are the things that we'll talk about today. I think first is helping you design and define very clearly who your customer segments are for the kind of service offerings you are creating. We'll talk a little bit about how you can find them, some of the attributes that are visible that you can tap into to kind of like help design the right channel and the right acquisition strategy. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about the ways and the different strategies you can use to find your first customers and maybe your second, third, and so on. If you have anything else you want to add to this discussion today, feel free to just drop your thoughts on the chat. Happy to try to answer any of your questions. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes as well, I usually much prefer if we make this presentation as interactive as possible. The group today is relatively small, so I think I can accommodate a few questions as we go. So don't be afraid to unmute yourself and just interrupt me if there is anything that is unclear, or if you have any question at that moment in time. Otherwise, the chat is open, so please drop any of your comments, any of your questions in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to answer them at the end of the call. So for those who don't know me, maybe I'll start with a quick introduction about myself. So I've been a freelancer for close to 5 years now. Prior to me being a freelancer, I've been a consultant for a good 5-6 years. And when I started my freelance business, I started as an innovation consultant. So since then, I've managed to turn my consulting business at least 2 years ago into something that is a little bit more sustainable and scalable. And I don't really have to manage that business much. And so my hope is I can share a little bit about my experience building that business in the past 5 years with all of you. In addition to that, I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Ravelry. We are a freelancer platform that is built to serve freelancers. We are focused on building tools and solutions to help freelancers with all the boring back-end operations and activities. And also we are focused on helping them find new clients in the business. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check out our website on www.theravenry.com, and you can learn a bit more about us there as well. So before we begin and talk a little bit about finding customers, I think it's good to just do a quick recap of what we talked about last week, just so that we can contextualize a little bit. First of all, I can't believe that it's already been a week since I last ran that session, because I felt like it was only like 2 days ago. Time really flies. But I thought it would be nice to kind of like just remind ourselves a little bit, kind of like where we were from the last session, and hopefully from there we can contextualize the discussion today a little bit better. So again, from the last session, what we did was to help, we shared some tips to help you think about how you can define your service offerings and think about how you can use that service offerings to kind of like solve your clients' problems. There are 3 main things, I suppose, that we can take away from it. First is having a clear understanding of what you're selling. And some of the sub-bullet points of that is do not be a jack of all trades. So someone who basically offer everything and anything to a client anytime someone is willing to listen to you. Second is don't be a grocery list salesperson. It is very common for freelancers to think that, oh, you know what, like I can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and go to a client and inundate them with this barrage of options. Not great, because your clients get overwhelmed, right? And finally, don't be vanilla. And what we mean by that is don't be so generic that it's hard for you to differentiate yourself in the market. So try to find what's unique about you. We talk a little bit about some strategy to do that from the last session. And if you've missed out on that, join our Discord community and Telegram channel, and we have shared our videos, and eventually we'll also create some documents and worksheets as well to help you figure out how to define that. The second main takeaway from last session was to basically find a niche. And we talk about how you should learn how to stand out with your services, and that will help you sell faster, and also focus on selling for value, right? Rather than selling for cheap, right? We are trying to avoid as a freelancer to be someone who is competing on price all the time. So we emphasize quite a bit on how we can strike for value rather than selling for price or selling for cheap. And finally, I think the point of solving problem is something that we emphasize quite a lot. I think a lot of people, when they focus on, when they're doing their freelancing sales pitch, they're very focused on talking about what they can do as a freelancer. So they'll talk about, oh, I'm a designer, I am a consultant, I can help you do workforce transformation, or I'm a writer, I can write 2,000 word articles. A lot of people fall into that trap. Instead, what we suggest is to kind of focus on the outcome instead, right? So the analogy we used was, don't sell the drill, sell the hole. So for those who just joined today, you might be find it a bit strange that we use this analogy. The point is, when people buy a drill, they're not really keen on the drill itself. They are more focused and they're trying to figure out like what this drill can help them with, right? So similar to your freelance sales pitch, focus on the outcome that you can generate for your customers rather than the thing that you do, right? And to kind of do that well, we do suggest that you spend some time empathizing with your customers, mapping out their journey. And this is specifically their journey to solve that problem. And through that map, determine where their biggest pain points are. And using that to kind of like, repackage your capabilities or your offerings into something that is a little bit more outcome or result based. So these were the 3 things that we talked a little bit last week. And the outcome of that was something quite simple. So we just wanted you to be able to articulate one thing, which is your service offerings, right, in this one sentence. And I think last week we talked quite a bit about the specific outcome and benefit, right? We talked about how you can package your offerings. But today we'll talk a little bit more about how you can determine your customer segment and how do you actually go about finding them and acquiring them. So that's kind of like our focus area for today. So let's begin. So to start with, I always like to kind of challenge people in terms of what they think, what they believe in right now about their customers, right? So everyone at this point in time, hopefully you already have some sort of an idea in terms of what service offerings you're trying to offer to your clients as a freelancer. And with that, you should already have some sort of an idea in your head what kind of customers will be interested in your product or in your service, right? So that is what we call the customer hypothesis. Why do we say that this is a customer hypothesis? So the reason is because we don't believe that is true, something is true until it's proven, right? It's very important that, especially when we go into business, to have that beginner's mindset and not to assume that you know everything and you have all the answers about your business, about your customers, about your service offerings, etc., right? Rather, we suggest that it's best to start by questioning some of the things that you think you know, right? And see if that actually survived the test of the market, right? As they say, everyone, it's easy to come up with a plan until you get hit in your face, right? So, or get punched in your face, right? So, let's figure out how it's like to get punched in our face and learn how to iterate and deal with those punches, right? So that's why we call it a hypothesis, because we want to see whether or not that is true or not, right? Based on that hypothesis, right, what we want to do is to figure out how do we build experiments around that understanding or that assumption that we have, and test it and see if indeed that customer that we think are the prime target segment who's going to buy our service are really the ones that are going to buy our service. And that's why it's very important to kind of have that experimentation mindset as well as we go about this journey of defining our client segment and figuring out how to acquire them. And finally, the reason why it's so important as well for us to think from a beginner's mindset and to try to see this as an experiment rather than trying to see this as something that is already like perfect, something that, like I'm a freelancer, I've quit my job, this is going to work right away off the bat, right? So rather than having that mindset, having an experimentation mindset will help us move a lot more faster, because what happens is that we are not inundated by trying to perfect our portfolio, trying to make our offerings like as perfect or as beautiful as possible. Instead, we are just focused on executing and moving the service, moving and getting customers to hear about what we do and our pitch, and from there that will allow us to iterate much more quickly, right? So the idea is to move fast, test, break things, and hopefully we can learn from it and improve our approach altogether. So let's start by looking at that service offerings hypothesis that we came up with last week, right? So there are three components to it, and I've used an example here. For example, if you are someone who is, focused on content writing, and like last week we talked about how you should reframe that offering or that activity from task to outcome, right? So the task is to create high quality content strategy and writing, right? Whether it's article, whether it's blog post, whether it's a newsletter, whatever it is, we want to reframe it to the outcome, right? So the service offerings hypothesis is therefore something like, this is an example. So again, for you, it might look very different. So feel free to iterate and customize it to your own needs. So I drive revenue by increasing site traffic. So that is the outcome, the value that I'm generating for my customers, right? For small and medium businesses, by providing my task, high quality content strategy and writing services. So this is kind of like the starting point for you as a freelancer. This is what you're offering the market or the customers, right? Now, as I mentioned, let's zoom in on the customer segment bit. So this may seem like it's specific enough, right? So this is your customer hypothesis, which is I assume that my customers will be small and medium businesses, right? Do you think that this is enough? And again, feel free to unmute yourself and drop your thoughts in the chat. Do you think that defining your customer segment as small and medium businesses is sufficient to help you be able to find these customers as you grow your business? Drop your comments, your chat on the on the message, and I just want to get a some quick thoughts from you guys, what you think about this statement or this characterization of your customer segment. Okay, Dhiren, yes, it might help to mention niche. Any specific way that you would define the niche? Yeah, I think there is definitely some benefits in thinking about our past clients. It's definitely helpful to see what has worked in the past, right? But what about the characteristics of these past clients that's going to help you figure out, your niche, right? So I've actually come up with a bunch of, questions that, maybe you can ask yourself, right? When we think about small, medium enterprises, or businesses, it's definitely not specific enough, right? Because there's a lot of different kinds of businesses. So I usually would ask people, what kind of industry are they in? People within these industries or within these businesses or within this segment, what are their main fear? Where do they live? What kind of budget do they have? And ultimately, when you think about businesses, even if your customers is a corporate client, right? Ultimately, your buyer is an individual, right? So you want to understand things like, what is their job title? What's the typical job title of your buyer, right? What's their favorite book? Where do they hang out, right? On social media? Do they join any Slack community? So these are questions that you need to drill down into and get as much detail as possible. And hopefully today we can get into that discussion a little bit more, and hopefully it will help you enlighten, and help you define and reframe the way you think of your customer segment in a more specific way. On top of that, I think it's also very, very important for us to think about whether or not that market is big enough for us, right? So if you're starting as a freelancer, more often than not, it's better to be overly specific, right, rather than overly generic, because it'll help you find those people faster. It'll help you sell to them much more quickly, right? And as a freelancer, oftentimes it's not as important to think about the size of the market, right? But I would challenge that assumption perhaps, and maybe challenge aspiration as well. If you have to think about yourself as a freelancer and you have to think about growing your business beyond just as a freelancer, right? It's quite important to think about how big this market is ultimately and how much you can actually grow your business to, right? So the reason why I say this is as follows. So maybe I'll share a little bit about my personal example, right? So I started as an innovation consultant, and the universe of customers that I thought of initially, I thought that, I'm just going to sell it to the CIOs, right? Which is the chief innovation officers of the world, right? Of large companies. Then that is fine. Like that is very specific, right? And I also have very specific offerings, which is I'm just gonna do like, training or like, workshops for, these customers to help them understand how to, come up with new ideas in terms of, new business ideas, right? Or new startup ideas for their businesses, right? So it was a very niche offering for a very niche group of people, right? But as I grew my business, so this was in year 2 or year 3, I started to realize that the way I characterized my niche or my customer segment was too small. It was too specific. It's so specific that it was very hard for me to grow my business. At that point in time, I've already hired a couple of people to help me with my freelance business. So we're starting to turn that freelance business into an agency. And I started to realize that that market is way too small and I need to learn how to expand it, right? So as a freelancer at this point, it may not necessarily be very important for you to think about the size of your market, but as you scale your business, as you, kind of like grow into a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people operation, it's very important for you to start thinking about like, who are your captive audience and are they big enough for it to be worthwhile for you to offer services to them, right? So I've shown this chart. This is a very simple chart that represents TAM, which is total addressable market, which is the universe of customers that will buy from you if they can buy from you, right? The second one is SAM, serviceable addressable market, right? Which is the amount or the number of customers that you can actually serve, right? As an individual or as an agency, right? And ultimately SOM, right? SOM, which is your serviceable obtainable market. So not only are they your addressable market, you can actually go out and sell to them and turn them into your customer, right? And oftentimes you want to start with the green circle with the SOM, right? And then grow into SAM and TAM, right? But ideally, as you think about your business or your service offerings and your customer segment, try to assess this very early on in your business, because it will really help you think about the kind of service offerings that you can create for your customers and how you can upsell and cross-sell and expand your offerings as you grow your business. So I want to put this up front so that we are aware that while we as a business, as a freelancer, as a solopreneur, it's important to find your niche. It's also very important for us to think long-term and see where is the market ultimately for us, how big it is for us, and whether or not it's worthwhile for us to build a business around this. So with that, I want to go and deep dive into, how do we then like define that first, second, third customers that we want, right? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to draw up a portrait of your customer. And this is not rocket science, right? So maybe just give me a thumbs up or some sort of reaction, any reaction, right? Like whether or not and tell me whether or not you've actually heard of this thing called customer persona. And this will give me an idea of whether or not I should, go deep dive and spend a lot of time with this. Okay, Daddy, you've kind of like, understood this. Arika never heard of it. Dhiren has heard of it. Okay. Anyone else has heard of this? Okay, no. So, okay, perhaps I can spend a bit of time since a lot of people don't have like any or not a lot of understanding of this, right? So customer persona essentially is a snapshot, right? Think about it as a profile photo or a profile page of your typical customer. In this profile page, what you want to see is things like a typical name, right? You can give them a name, right, of your customer. You want to know, right, like what is their typical age, right? What is their typical job title? And in what industry, right? So job title could be like, oh, they are HR manager, they are a chief innovation, whatever, right? A marketing manager, a procurement officer, etc., right? What is a typical title of this persona that you are targeting, right? And then, apologies, I don't know if you can hear that, but my dog is barking in the background. And then you can include things like, where do they spend most of their time? Are they a very active, a person who's very active online on social media? If so, which social media? Are they reading blogs, right? So for example, if they are marketers, they might be following, I don't know, some sort of a marketing blog, right? If they are, someone who is a marketing manager who typically is quite senior in their career, that's why they are kind of able to contract out some of the work to, freelancers. Maybe they're married and maybe they kind of like to follow blogs about kids, about family, etc., right? So try as much as possible to build this profile page of your customer, right? My suggestion to you, if you have never heard of this, if is just to go to Google, right? Type customer persona. I literally took the first screenshot from Google Images to show all of you this, because there's a million different ways you can actually build a user persona, or customer persona. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But do that and try as much as possible to create this portrait for your customer before you even try to sell to your first customer. And the reason is, it's quite simple. It's because it will give you a clear understanding of the kind of people that you'll be dealing with as a customer, right? And what you want to do is you want to get into their head in terms of understanding what are their fears, where they spend most of their time, because that's kind of like how you're going to find them, right? If you understand their fears, you'll know what drives them, and you'll know how to package your offer and your service so that it appeals to their psyche, right? So very important, try to draft up this customer persona before you do anything. The second thing that you might want to ask yourself is this, right? Are these customers businesses or individuals? Now, this is really important because the two segments, these are the two major umbrellas of customers, right? They behave very differently, right? B2B customers or corporate customers, they have very long sales cycle. And what that means is that, you know, it takes a lot of time for you to try to convert them to become a client, right? You need to write a proposal. You need, well, first of all, you need to find them, and then you need to convince them that you are worth talking to. You need to write a proposal. You need to go through some sort of a procurement process, which is quite long, right? So in general, in my experience, B2B client as a freelancer, it takes anywhere between 3 to 9 months to close a deal. So it is a significant upfront investment from you to nurture that relationship. And the reason why I want to bring this up as well is because if you know that your customers are B2B, be prepared to invest that time upfront, and don't be discouraged too early, because it is quite normal for the sales cycle to take that long for them to make that decision, right? So yeah, just something to kind of like take note of, right? Whereas if you look at the B2C side, right, the customer side, the sales cycle is just much shorter, right? They make decisions really quickly. They don't have to rely on anyone else. They know their budget. They don't have to report to their boss. So it moves really, really quickly. I've mentioned the sales process is very formal, whereas for B2C, the sales process typically is very much relationship based. So as long as they trust you, it's much more convenient to kind of like sell to them, right? Another thing about B2B clients is that it's very important for you to have strong past experiences or portfolio, right? It is almost a must, I would say. It's almost compulsory for you to kind of like have those things ready when you're approaching a B2B client. They will ask for your portfolio, case studies, testimonials, because they do a lot of due diligence when it comes to working with a vendor. So be prepared for that, right? Whereas with B2C clients, a lot of it is based on trust and referrals. So it's a lot more lax, right? And then of course, with B2B, stringent requirements, with B2C more relaxed. B2B is less price sensitive. So they typically are able to pay a bit more, and they're more willing and they're more accommodating as well with budget, because they have a lot more experience. They have the budget to deal with it, right? But with B2C clients, typically they are very price sensitive. So they might compare freelancer A to freelancer B and decide on, you know, which one they work with based on purely price, which could be challenging if you're trying to kind of like scale your business in, you know, in a meaningful way long term, because ultimately it's very difficult to kind of like, you know, scale up your price and, you know, charge more for your time. So something to consider as well as you're kind of like thinking about the kind of customer segments that you're aiming for. The other thing that is very important for you to think about, and this is one of the output of you creating the customer persona or user persona, it is what you want is to identify the most visible attributes. You can call it the MVA, right? What is the most visible attribute about your customer? These are things that will allow you to be able to identify your customers out there, whether it's through, you know, online platforms, social media, or it is through your friendship or friend network, friend and family network. It is very important for you to identify these visible attributes, because this will help you target them more easily, right? So forget about things like, you know, what's their favorite ice cream. You probably won't be able to kind of like, you know, use that to target your customer, right? But like these are things that is easily accessible. And when you're running things like ads, perhaps, you know, you want to test using ads to target these people on Facebook or on Instagram. It is much easier if you understand clearly like these attributes about them. Where do they live? Where do they work? Do they go shopping on, you know, do they shop for shoes? Do they shop for books? You know, all these things are very, very useful when you are trying to target them, you know, later on. And I think I've mentioned this before as well. As part of your user persona process, right? You will also try as much as possible to detail out how your customers spend their time, right? So think about this. Think about if you were that person, if you were that customers, right? And if let's say the customer is a marketing manager again, right? Where do they spend their time on social media? Do they read any blogs? Do they shop on any specific shopping sites? Are they more an Amazon type people, or are they more of like, if you're in Southeast Asia, Shopee or Lazada, where do they shop, right? Do you think they are part of any community groups, right? Are they on Facebook groups? If so, what kind of groups? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Slack, right? Nowadays, there's a lot of Slack community. And as I've mentioned, we also have Discord communities at Ravenry. So like, are they part of any of these groups? Because this will help you again, like find the right channel to find them, right? So understanding that is critical, right? Now, when you're looking for a freelancer as a customer, right? You also typically will look at recruitment site as a substitute product, right? So either I hire someone on a contract basis or part-time basis, or I hire a freelancer, right? So do they go to any recruitment sites? If so, which one, right? Are they using any freelance platform, right? So are they using Upwork? Are they using TopTal? So all of these things are very critical for you to understand. And that will help you narrow down the approaches that you use to find these customers. The other concept that I want to talk about real quick as well, and this is something that I'll cover in future episodes, not so much today, is this concept of above the gap and below the gap. So what I mean by above the gap and below the gap is, above the gap are basically people who can make decisions, who do not have to revert to anyone else in the organization when it comes to making, a purchase decisions for like a freelancer service or a contractor, right? Below the gap are people who typically cannot make those decisions. They have to rely on their boss, their manager, their finance team to make those decisions, right? So when you talk, especially if you're dealing with B2B clients, right? It doesn't matter if they're individuals, right? You need to understand whether or not they are the decision makers or they are the executors. There are some strategies on how to transition your conversation from the below the gap people, which is the executors, to the decision makers. That's something that I will speak a bit more in detail in the future. But it's very, very important for you to try to move. Your goal right now is try to move that conversation from someone who is not making any decision in the organization to their boss, to the decision maker, right? So as you're kind of like thinking about your customer segment as well, think whether or not they are actually a decision maker, are they above the gap? Because that will help you move your sales cycle much more quickly. The other thing that is very important to consider, and sorry, I'm bombarding you guys with so much information right now because we'll talk about the strategy at the end. But it's important for you to kind of have this at the back of your mind, because this is part of like the way you define your service offerings. And without that, it doesn't matter like, how well you can target your customer if you're not able to understand, their psyche, their fears, their motivation. This is why I'm spending so much time on this. But one of the things that are important to consider as well is, what do your customers really care about, right? This is a very simple metric, right? Speed, quality, price. This is like the delta, the three things that like most businesses need to consider, right? When they collect, determine their customer segment or even like packaging their service, right? Because depending on what service you offer and what customers you have to choose oftentimes 2 out of the 3 things on this chart, right? So oftentimes you will either be a speed and quality provider, right, but expensive, right? Or you'll be a speedy, a fast but cheap provider, but with low quality. You can also be a cheap provider and a high quality provider, but it'll just be really, really slow, right? So the question you need to answer first of all is, where do you want to play in this, I guess, overlaps, right, of these 3 circles, right? There are some situations where you can kind of achieve all 3, which is you can achieve like really affordable, you can offer really affordable offerings, right? Service to your clients very quickly and at high quality, right? And we'll talk about that again in the future when we talk a little bit about how you productize and standardize and scale your service. But for now, as an individual freelancer, it's very, very difficult to do all 3. Either you'll kill yourself trying to do all 3. I'm sure you can do it for cheap, right? High quality stuff and do it quickly, but you will run yourself dry doing that, right? So my suggestion is to kind of like think about your customers, right? And figure out what are the things that's important to them, because not everyone cares about price. Not everyone cares about speed. Not everyone cares about quality, right? So figure out what is the right combination of value proposition that they care about and design your offerings based on that, right? And also find customers that fit that value offerings at the end of the day. The other thing that is very worthwhile for you to do upfront as well, and this is part of like understanding and gaining insights about your customer, is to map out their gain points and their pain points, right? So I think last week we talked a little bit about pain points. Pain points are basically things that are bothering your customers, things that they're trying to solve, but they don't know how, or they cannot, they don't have time, they don't have the money to do it, etc., right? Gain points is a little bit different. Gain points are basically things that they aspire to have, right? So let's say if you're offering logo design services, right? Maybe the pain point that you're addressing is that, oh, I don't have a designer, I need to hire a freelancer, right? But as a customer, right, I don't just think about pain point, right? I also have aspirations as to like how my logo will affect my business, right? So maybe one of the things that I'll care about as a gain point is, can my logo drive more customer stickiness to my website because my logo is so unique, right? So think about what are some of those things that your customer will think about, right? Which is gain points and pain points, and try to map it out as much as you can. And based on those two gain points and pain points, think about what are the jobs to be done for your customers. Again, I don't have too much time today to kind of cover all of this, but I would suggest that you just Google this, and I'm sure you can find something. I think this is called the customer empathy map. You can find quite a lot of things about this, but I highly suggest that you do that before you can like start figuring out like what customer that you want to kind of approach and how you can like characterize them and find them in the market, right? And with this, I also want to kind of leave you with one more thought, which is when you think about your offerings as a freelancer, and also when you think about your customers, right? There are usually two kinds of services that as a freelancer, you can offer. One is called what I call a pill. The other one is vitamin, right? So a pill, it solves your problem when you're sick. So you have symptoms, right? When you're sick, you feel sick, you're feverish, you feel dizzy, you have a headache, I don't know. You have symptoms that tells your body that you're sick, and that's why you go and grab a pill and you eat it, right? So it's the same with customers in the market as well. If you're solving for customers that are looking for a pill, that means that they have very visible pain points. They have very visible symptoms that is bothering them and bothering their business. Aim for that as much as you can, because it's much more it's much easier for you to target customers that's already experiencing a lot of pain, right? Because they already know that they're feeling all the symptoms and they want it solved, right? And then when we talk about vitamin, we're talking about purely services that addresses gain point. Okay, and they are services that just addresses gain point, right? So things like luxury item, right? Does it solve any pain point? Not really, right? Like what it does is that it just gives you like social status, it makes you feel good. It's all the gain point, it's all services or products that solves like the gain points for the customer, right? So as a freelancer, again, if your job is, or your offerings is focused on just becoming a vitamin for the client, right? It's very hard to convince them, right? Think about it again. Like if you are a vitamin salesman, it's much more difficult to tell the customer that, oh, you need this multivitamin with beta carotene, with ginkgo biloba, because it will do ABC for you, right? But there's nothing wrong with the customers. The customers don't feel like they are feeling any of the symptoms, right? So again, as you're kind of like as you're characterizing your service offerings and thinking about your customer, try to focus as much as you can on pain points, right? Rather than focusing only on gain points. Gain points is a nice bonus to have, right? And when you're communicating with clients, it's good to kind of bring it up, but try as much as possible to focus on pain point, because that's the easiest to sell to, okay? Now, just to kind of like reframe or like recontextualize what we're talking about so far, I've spoken quite a bit about the customer hypothesis, right? I've spoken quite a bit about, how do you find information about your customers, and how you actually think about, like characterizing your customer and figuring out like what they need and what they are feeling, right? But ultimately, as I've mentioned early in the call today, these are all just assumptions that you have. These are just hypotheses, right? And you, as a freelancer, your job is to get out of the building. And by that, I mean to go and reach out to people, to go and talk to real customers, okay? Not your friends, okay? Not your family members, not your wife, not your husband, not your girlfriend, boyfriend, right? Your job is to get out of the building and talk to real potential customers and test out your assumptions, okay? And what you want to do is you want to test your assumptions as quickly as possible. This is a really bad like a drawing from me, but this is meant to be like a beaker glass with a litmus test, and you have a lot of experiments, but I don't think it's coming through. But the idea is that you want to have like, a bunch of experiments that you run very, very quickly. Okay, you don't want to run an experiment that's too long because it's very expensive and it's time consuming and it's going to drain you as a freelancer. But what you want to do is that you want to be able to line up as many things to test as possible to figure out what is the right approach to get customers for your business. And at the end of the day, these are some of the things that will tell you that you've achieved that, what I call the service market fit. Like in a startup, we talk about product market fit, right? But we are freelancers, so we talk about service market fit, right? So how do you know when you've actually achieved service market fit? One, your customers come back to you. That's a great sign. That means that you're solving something that is real for them. Two, your sales cycle is much shorter, which means that customers understand really, really quickly what you're offering. They get it, and they're willing to spend money on it. Three, you're increasing conversion like crazy, or like you're maybe not like crazy, but you're increasing your conversion. And what that means is that your customers are convinced by your offering, right? They understand the way you're communicating your offering, right? And they are willing to try and buy your service, right? And this is for first-time customer. Fourth, and this is usually a very strong validation, customers are willing to pay more than what you initially asked for, right? So as an example, when I started my consulting business, I undercharge. Well, I didn't know that I was undercharging, but I undercharged a little bit, compared to the market rate. And I was really happy with what I got, right? But as I got busier and busier and busier, right, I realized that my customers are willing to pay more for my time, right? And that's kind of like when I found out that we found that service market fit. We found that customers need what we have. We found that customers love what we do. And we found that the results that we create for the customers is really impactful for their business, right? So this is kind of like just telltale signs when your service has found the right customers, okay? So it's very important for you to kind of like figure that out. Now, oftentimes it's not clear, or it's not immediately clear whether it's the service bit that is wrong. So are you offering, your product in the wrong way? Is it just not the right product or service offer? Or is it like the wrong customers that you're targeting, right? Sometimes it's very, very hard to tell. But once you find that fit, right, these are the 4 things that you should start seeing in your business, right? Without you having to kind of put too much effort in. And that's kind of like your goal in the early days, is to kind of test as many of your assumptions as possible so that you can start generating this flywheel really, really quickly for your business. So the first thing that you need to do as you're kind of like thinking about how to test your assumptions, right? And to kind of like make sure that you're achieving that service market fit, is to list down all the assumptions that you have about your customers and about your business as well, if you can. So your customers' pain point, their budget, their job title, list down as many of these things as possible, right? And figure out a way to test them as quickly as possible, right? So that's your goal. Now, once you've kind of listed that down, what you want to do is you want to design the right experiments to sell and see how customers respond to you, right? Don't dwell on it too long, right? Don't be afraid that you're gonna make an initial blunder, especially in the early days of you doing your freelancing business, because your goal is to learn from those mistakes quickly and fix them and move on and get better at it, right? So if you're trying to kind of perfect your offerings and your customer segmentation and acquisition strategy too early, you will struggle because you will not start selling, because you're so busy like internalizing all of these problems in your head and coming up with different like scenarios on how like it might be better, right? The best thing is actually just to get out there, get out of the building and test it out right away with real customers, right? But of course, when you test it, you want to make sure that it's in a controlled situation, right? So for example, you don't want to test with like 1,000 potential clients right away. That might ruin your chances with them in the future. What you want to do, maybe you want to test with 10, right? So figure out like what is the right testing strategy for your business, and go ahead and start doing those tests and validation. Now, before we talk about like those selling and testing strategy, I think there's one thing I want to emphasize again. Your job, even though you are looking for customers and trying to convince them to buy from you, is not to sell, right? So when you reach out to your customers, especially in the first few years or first few months of you starting the business, what you want to do is you want to learn and you want to gain as much information as possible, and you want to figure out what problem there is to solve, right? So your conversation shouldn't be, oh, like I'm offering this service and I can help you triple your revenue or your traffic. Do you want to buy from me? That shouldn't be the way you talk about your business. Instead, what you want is you want to kind of like start by asking a lot of questions to your customers, right? So you can Google Socratic questioning. So that is a methodology that I use a lot, which is I just sit with the customer, right? Order like, book a time with them and have coffee, have tea with them, and just ask them a bunch of questions about their business. What is the main initiative that you have right now in your business? What is blocking you from achieving those initiatives? What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now? How, like, if you wish there was something that can be done to help you, what would that look like? What kind of tangible output do you hope? Do you have enough time to solve all of this problem? So ask them as many questions as possible to try to understand a couple of things. One, what is their problem, right? Before you start selling, right? Because we don't want, again, remember, we don't want to be jack of all trades, and we do not want to be the grocery list salesperson, right? So figure out what it is their pain points are, and then sell, and then, focus on, but when you start, focus on understanding that problem first, right? And the second thing that you want to do when you're having this conversation is you want to qualify if they are actually above the gap customer or below the gap, right? So again, as just a reminder, above the gap customers are the ones who are able to make decisions, right? They are the ones who have to hold the purse strings. They're the ones who actually can make the call, right? So you want to figure out, whether they're above the gap or below the gap, and based on that insight, you can then cater your conversation. Because if they are a below the gap customer or client, you will have a completely different conversation with them in terms of how to get their buy-in so that you can be introduced to the real decision maker, right? We'll talk about that in the future. Today, we'll talk a little bit more about the basic strategy of getting customers. But this is why I want to emphasize that we do not want to sell, right? We want to solve. And to solve, you need to understand. And to understand, you need to ask questions, right? So start by asking a lot of questions. So now, what are some of the strategies or the testing methodologies that you can use, right, to kind of reach out to your customers? So there are a few channels that you can tap into to find your customers, right? The strongest one in my experience is referral, right? So customers that have worked with you or your ex-colleagues, they reach out to you and then they'll tell you, oh, by the way, go and talk to this person. I will drop a note with him or with her, and I'm sure you'll be able to help them, right? Or they will kind of like, tell their friends about you and give their friend your contact, and you get connected that way. So that's like the most powerful one. Events is a good one. So like what I'm doing right now, right? I'm sharing some of the experience I had to build thought leadership and to connect with more people. Content is a great one. So you can create blog posts, create your own website and create blog posts on it, showcase your portfolio, and help people discover you through content, using content, and make sure that it's all like SEO. You have SEO strategy around that so you can get discovered, etc. So example of that is like people like Neil Patel, right, who's managed to kind of turn his essentially like a freelance solopreneur business into a proper agency, right? So content is a powerful tool. The easiest one, I think, like a lot of starters, they'll go to marketplaces. So they'll go to places like Upwork, they'll go to freelancer.com, they go to Fiverr and start just kind of like posting their services there. Well, the challenge with marketplace is that you oftentimes do not get a lot of money, especially at the beginning, because it's very hard to compete on price in those marketplaces. It's very hard to get visibility, right? So there's a different set of problems with marketplaces that today I'm probably not going to talk a lot about. Finally, there's also social media, right? Which is how do you actually find the right customers, do cold outreach to them, continually post relevant content, thought leadership content to position yourself as top of mind in terms of thought leadership for specific topics, right? So again, that's like, these are just the 5 channels that you can use very easily today to get your first customers. Now let's talk about them one by one, right? So marketplace, I'm not going to talk too much about it, right? There's a lot of best practices already. If you use Upwork, I'm sure you can go to Upwork's website and they'll tell you exactly how to use Upwork meaningfully. I won't talk about it, so I'll leave you guys to use the power of Google to discover all these insights yourself. I'll start with network, okay? This is like the easiest way you can start selling your service, right? A few benefits with network. One is you're actually tapping onto a network of people that is already, that already knows you, that is already part of your personal network, right? Which is great. These people already understand your capability and they already trust you, hopefully, if you're a good person. And they're more than willing to kind of like, sit down with you and understand what you do and hopefully give you some leads, right? How do you start, right? So what are some of the strategies you can use to tap into your network and get your first client? One is through personal outreach, right? So obviously invite them for coffee, invite them for a conversation, and don't sell, right? But focus on solving their problem, right? Now, not all of them will fit the criteria of your customer, but it's okay to have a conversation with a person who is potentially below the gap, right? So maybe they're not a decision maker, but they might know someone who can make a decision around buying a freelance service. They might have a friend in company XYZ who might need your help, right? So the more you talk to your personal network, the more they will be able to be an ambassador for you, right? So you want to do that, but you don't want to sell, right? Instead, what you want to do is solve. And as I've mentioned, you need to understand deeply where customers are facing, struggling with, right? And what I would suggest for everyone is to develop a problem-solving framework to begin with. Okay, now let me explain like what that is. So when you're having a conversation with a customer or with your friend or with your family member or your prospect, right, or your whoever it is on your network, you want to sit down with them and you want to have a framework or a script in terms of how you ask those questions so that one, you can get the right insights and information about them and from them, right? Two, so that you can use that line of questioning to develop or to build trust with them. Because the more you ask these questions, the more they realize that, wow, this person actually knows what he's talking about. He's asking about all this SEO strategy. I haven't thought about it. He's asking me about, let's say you're doing branding. He's asking me about like my company values and my DNA that I haven't thought about. Maybe he can be valuable for me or for someone, right? So I don't know what business you're in, right? But depending on your business, you will have different problem-solving framework or Socratic questioning framework. So I think I just saw, sorry, Darren, I just saw your message. You're asking me what type of questioning you call it. It's called Socratic questioning. Let me just type it in. Yeah, so yeah, develop that problem-solving framework or that line of questioning, Socratic questioning, because that will help you derive the right insights from your customers and be able to kind of like build that credibility very early with them and hopefully close your deal with them, right? The second one is to find your clients via organic means. Now, there are a few ways you can tap into this. Organic basically means, you sit passively at home and someone reach out to you, right? Organically, right? So obviously referral is one. So once you kind of talk to a lot of people on your network, they will start to refer people to you, right? So that's kind of like one way to do it. The other way to do it is to build content. It can be videos, it can be articles, it can be blog posts, it can be social media posts, whatever it is, right, that you can create and you can put on the internet for people to discover about you is usually quite helpful in helping you build that organic channel, right? The great thing about like organic content is that it also helps people remember that you exist without having to set up like a sit-down call, right, to remind them that, hey, I am this person who does branding, right? So instead, if you keep posting about social media, if you have a newsletter that is active about social media, then all of that will remind your network and the people that is interested in working with you in the past that you exist, you're still offering this service, and you're even better now, and you have thought leadership, and you actually know what you're talking about, right? So how do you start, right? You should start with understanding where your customers are. So remember the user persona thing that we talked about earlier today? Now this comes to play, right? We mentioned about where these people spend most of their time, right? If your customers are B2B customers, right? And you know that they are in, I don't know, HR, for example, right? You want to post like a lot of content on LinkedIn because because HR manager probably spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because they are doing recruitment, because they are hiring people, because they are, I don't know, they're posting jobs, right? So you want to go where they are, which is LinkedIn, and post as much content as possible about yourself, and not cringy content, of course, right? You want to create high quality content, right? And try to remind them that you exist and you are a thought leader in something and you can help them solve their problem, right? So that's kind of like what you want to do with your organic content, right? Now, once you've kind of like done that, you also want to kind of like start talking about thought leadership stuff. So don't just post on social media, don't just post things like, oh, here's a recent article about this, right? No, comment on it, right? Write an opinion piece, right? Spend some time reading and understanding it and create good quality posts about those content that you're posting, right? About those articles that you're resharing. Because you want people to have trust in you. You want to build credibility and you want to be a voice that people listen to, right? You don't want to just be a noise, right? So focus on that via social media, and that will help you kind of like gain some sort of traction on social media. And again, if your clients spend more time on blogs, so, create long form articles, create newsletters so that they can follow you and your, thought leadership. Now I'm in consulting, right? So I spend a lot of time building case studies, testimonial documents, building white papers so that customers know exactly what I do. Customers know exactly the kind of things that I've done in the past and the kind of successes that I've created for my customers. And they'll come back to me once they have those requirements, once they have those projects, right? So similar to you, right? Figure out like what are those things that your customers care about, right? And figure out how you can reach out to them and use those channels meaningfully to help you build that credibility. The other thing that I use often is events. So the great thing about event is that it helps create a connection between audience or potential customers and you, so that they can see how you talk, they can see how you think, and it's really useful in building credibility on a personal level, right? So do use events to kind of like build that credibility. The other benefit about event is that if you actually run events in conjunction or in collaboration with other people, you're actually tapping onto their network, right? So for example, if today I'm running the event not by myself, but let's say I invite David, right, to be my speaker on this event, right? What happens is that I actually tap into David's network as well. So I got David to invite all his friends, and suddenly all David's friends become my potential customers, right? So events is a great way to expand your network and build that credibility with you on a personal level, and also educate people in a meaningful way to help them make a decision, right? If your business or your offering is very complicated, events is really powerful. For me, I'm in consulting. So sometimes the service offerings that I offer, that I create, is not very easily articulated, right? Like through, a blog post or, through a case study. So events allow me to educate my potential customers. What do I do as a freelancer, right? What have I done, and I can answer questions that they might have in mind that, in a typical blog post, I cannot answer, right? Because I don't know what people are concerned about, what people are wondering about, what's confusing. So events is a great way to kind of have that two-way conversation so that you can build your credibility directly without any hard selling, without any like sales commitment made, during the process itself. Because sometimes when you ask people for coffee, they feel like, oh, like he's going to sell me something. But events is a great way because it's non-committal, right? They can just skip the event if they cannot make it or if they don't feel like it, right? So use event to your advantage as well. How do you start by creating an event, right? One is you need to know for a fact what problems your customers or your audience care about. If you don't have the right topic, it's very difficult to attract the right audience, right? So make sure they understand what pain points they face, right? Second is you have to spend a lot of time building content. So as an example, every time I create like a presentation like this, it takes me anywhere from 5x the length of the presentation to 8x, right? So if I'm thinking about a 1 hour event, I need to spend at least 5 hours to 8 hours to just come up with the content, the slides, practice my flow, etc. Right? So that's quite a bit of upfront commitment. And if you haven't done event before, or you haven't built any content in the past before, it may take you even more time, right? So highly suggested. I highly recommend this if you have complex product, and I think it's worth the investment. But it does require a lot of time and a lot of thinking upfront. So be prepared for that if you're using your event, right? And finally, I think I just want to talk about free a little bit because I think a lot of us here are still quite new, right? I would suggest that you watch this YouTube video as well, because I literally got this insights from this YouTube video. It's called Offer is King. Just Google it, and you'll learn quite a bit about how you can use this free strategy to kind of get new customers. So when we say free, I think in the freelance world, I think people are a bit cringy about it because they're like, oh, I've spent decades of my life building these capabilities. I cannot offer it for free. It doesn't make sense. But hear me out, right? When you're starting your freelance journey, or even when you're trying, you're far along in your journey and you're trying to kind of get more clients, it's very important for you to create a compelling offer, right? One of the ways to create compelling offer is by offering some sort of a free service, right? Or free product, right? As part of your engagement. Doesn't mean that you don't get paid at all, right? It just means that you're offering them something that they perceive as valuable and as something that they don't have to pay anything for, right? So there's 7 different strategies that this guy talked about using free in your sales approach, right? So 1, free with purchase, right? So simple. You buy A, right? You get B for free. Okay, simple, right? Free with purchase. Second one is limited free offer, right? Plus upsell, right? So essentially, it's like free with very limited capability. For example, right? The consultation or the SEO audit for your website is free. I'll do all the UI UX audit, the SEO audit, whatever, for free, right? And I'll give you a report for free. But the follow-up, right, the service that I offer in terms of like, suggestions or recommendations to make your website better, right, is not free. You have to pay me, right, for that. And that works because people already committed to you, right? You already spend time and you're already giving them insights that, and of course, like the free service that you offer, the audit has to be high quality, right? Because then they'll come back and they'll want to work with you. But what happens is that they already overcome the initial obstacle and inertia of finding someone to work with because they're already working with you, right? So it's much easier for you to upsell. The third one, I think, is free with penalty, right? So basically what happens is that you get someone to commit to a particular engagement. So let's say if you're a gym trainer, right? You get them, you get your clients to agree to commit to you with your 6-week workout plan, right? And if you don't kind of like meet any of the milestones, so for example, if they miss training, right? Like it's meant to be 5 days a week, they miss one of the days, they get penalized and they have to pay you for that penalty, right? Obviously, depending on your industry and your service offerings, that might work and might not work. So again, design your service offerings and figure out what's the right free strategy. Next one is very similar, free with deposit. So again, you get people to commit to you, right? But you get them to pay you upfront. So let's say they pay $3,000 for whatever you're offering, right? And in return, right, they have to complete your program, right? If they don't complete your program, the $3,000 you keep. If they complete it, it's free for them, right? So a bit risky. So you have to design this very carefully for you, right? But it's very attractive for a lot of people. It's very hard to say no, right? So again, something that you can think about. The fifth one is free forever, right? So free forever can be, let's say you have like a gym, right? You offer the gym for free, right? For people to use, but you monetize them for, I don't know, the supplements, right? Or you sell them like, the personal training, right? And, for X number of, to be eligible to kind of like get the free gym membership, you need to be able to, you need to commit to at least like 2 PT sessions, for example, right? So again, like you offer service X for free and then you charge people for other things, right? Next one is a free giveaway, right? So for example, like as part of engaging with you, you're offering them something for free, right? So if I were to use a gym example again, let's say you have like a 6-week challenge, right? That is worth $25,000 because you're offering them like, I don't know, full body analysis. They'll tell you what's your body fat. They give you a nutrition plan. All of that is for free, right? But you have to commit to $300 monthly sign up to my gym, right? So that is an example. And you can actually apply this to your service business as well. So an example would be something like SEO business, right? So they have to pay you retainer for like 12 months, right? But on a monthly basis, you'll give them a free audit or you'll give them like, a free article, for example, right? Whatever it is, right? So something that you can think about. And the last one is free with commitment, right? So, as you give them like, 12 months, they have to commit to you for 12 months and they get 2 months free, right? So that's an example of like free with commitment. So 2 months free as long as you sign up for like an annual retainer, for example. So again, some strategies for you to think about to kind of like close your very early day clients. And as you kind of like test all of this different strategy, right? Think about them as like multiple moving parts, right? Your goal is to have a service market fit where customers will keep coming back to you, where the service, the sales cycle is much shorter, right? You want to kind of get there. But before you get there, you have to keep iterating, right? So what you want to do is you want to keep building. So this is a concept from the lean startup. You want to keep building different prototypes or different strategy and different approaches and different channel and different communication and a different offer, right? You want to measure and see whether or not that offer gives you the right result. And is it like better than the other offer, right? So let's say you have 3 different experiments or prototypes of service offerings, right? And maybe for these 3 different service offerings, you're targeting 3 different customers, right? So you have like what, 9 different permutations, right? Of like how this can work. So A service with A customer, A service with B customer, A service with C customer, right? And then so on and so forth, right? So you want to run this experiment and measure and see which customer segment works best for which offering. And based on that, you want to learn and iterate your service offerings to make it better and more compelling, right? All you need at the beginning is just 1 customer and 1 offering that works, right? Or 1 customer segment, I mean. 1 customer segment and 1 offering that works, right? And your goal is to kind of achieve that. But to achieve that, you need to be able to tweak, iterate, make changes to your customer persona, the customer pain point that you want to address, the channel, the way you sell, and your product offering or service offering itself, right? So you want to keep going through this cycle as quickly as possible and make sure that your offering gets closer and closer to that service market fit. And that's pretty much it from today. So in summary, there are 3 things that I want you to take away today. 1, come up with your customer hypothesis. Who is your customer, right? 2nd, define that persona. So if your customer is a small, medium enterprises, right? Define clearly what they are, right? Get very specific. So instead of small business, small, medium business, maybe you want to call them SaaS, early stage SaaS startup that is based in Singapore or that is based in Indonesia, right? Get very, very specific, because that will allow you to articulate your offering specifically to them, and that will again help you or help them understand your offerings much better, right? The 3rd one is the most important one, is get out of the building, right? Go out there and test these ideas, these assumptions that you have with real customers. Don't talk about it with yourself. Don't talk about it with your, significant other. Talk to customers that you think will buy your service, right? So I'll leave you with this 3 summary. Now, thank you so much for joining me today. At this point in time, I just want to highlight one thing. So we do have a Telegram and Discord community for freelancers who are serious about scaling their business. I highly encourage all of you to join, to sign up to this. We do talk to our freelancers one-on-one. So they will talk to us. They will ask me questions. They will ask me strategies. They will share with me what they're trying to do, and I can give them some feedback. And there are other freelancers in there as well that's been successful that is able to do the same for you, right? We're trying to build a really, really meaningful and impactful community here. So do join us if you're interested to learn more outside of these events. And you can scan this QR code, or you can, let me just type in this as well into the chat. You can fill in this form as well for feedback, right? So I can understand a bit more about what you think about this event. And if you have any feedback for me, so I can improve this in the future episodes. And if you're interested to join our Discord or Telegram channel, you can also fill in this form and drop your email so that we can reach out to you and invite you. Currently, that channel and that community is invite only, it's private. So you can only join if we have your email address. So drop your email address in the form if you're interested, and we hope to see you there. Other than that, I will open up, I guess we have a bit of time. I'll open up the session for a bit of Q&A if there's any question. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or just drop your question in the chat. Happy to address them either way.